guys, welcome back to another episode by me, Zach. Welcome. Today, we're going to be continuing our Skyrim tier list series, which will be fun, hopefully. Probably controversial this time around, yes. We're going to be discussing my placement of the playable races / species contained within the hit video game Skyrim. Yes. We're going to be starting off today with the two beast races, moving into the mer races, and finishing off with the races of men. The first one is the Argonian. Now, I'm going to put Argonians here for now as we discuss them and move them as necessary. You may notice here on this list, by the way, that I've changed this up. It's not S through D or anything like that, because I wanted it to be extremely clear that pretty much every race in Skyrim is pretty reasonably close to all the other ones. It's actually... they're all honestly so kind of low-key with their abilities that any build works with any race, which is good, and pretty much any race can overcome any weaknesses it may have, and in fact, by the end of the game, many of the strengths that a race has are mostly things you can ignore. However, let's get right into it. The Argonians used to be my favorite playable race, and I still consider them to be honestly pretty great. I'm going to immediately move them here. So let's start with their weaker elements, I guess. That is resist disease 50%. Now, resist disease is good if you're playing in a modded scenario. Like, if you're playing in a modded setting, resist disease is really handy. Now, this is a 50% resistance, so it's not insane, but it is pretty solid. And if you're playing with mods that make diseases more consistent or more threatening, like more powerful in some way, whoo buddy, is this trait awesome. Even if it's only a coin flip, that's a coin flip that other races don't have. So, pretty nice. Their second option is water breathing. This allows them to breathe underwater. Obviously. This is forever, this is eternal, you have this at all times. Now, water breathing is an ability that a lot of people kind of trash talk because there's not many places to go underwater in Skyrim, and that is to an extent pretty true. There's a handful of locations where it's nice to have, but otherwise, you kind of have to seek out a purpose for it. However, when playing on high difficulties in modded settings, I do think that you can get some extra value out of this, because you can retreat to the river whenever anyone gets a little bit scary and hide there. That is about all I've got. These two abilities are admittedly pretty mid. Nothing too special there. Another somewhat mid ability that they've got is that their claws do +6 damage in unarmed combat, which is half of what the Khajiit gets. We'll be discussing them in a moment. And is 6 higher than normal people get, right? And that's pretty cool occasionally. It does make brawls and stuff a bit easier, but by and large, it doesn't really come up all that much. However, one thing stands above all else, and that is the Hist Skin Greater Power. This can be used once per day and allows you to regenerate your health 10 times faster for 60 seconds. Now, because Hist is essentially a regeneration effect, not only does it benefit your normal health regen, so if you boost your passive health regen, the Hist Skin bonus goes up, but in addition to this, other bonuses that affect healing will also affect it. So, for instance, the Necromage perk in the Restoration tree, if you are an undead Argonian and you activate Hist Skin, the Necromage perk will give you 25% more health regen, in addition to the 10 times faster bonus that you're getting, because of that perk, because you are undead, etc. Hist Skin is, I think, the second best activatable power in the game overall. There's really only one competitor that it has. We'll talk about that later. And the only one that's better, well, We'll talk about that later too, won't we? Overall, Argonians I think are great. Their passives are nice to have, but not anything crazy. I think water breathing is fun to get value out of, but you have to play a little bit creatively to get it. I understand. I will also note here, because the UESP happens to note this as well, if you're using the survival mode, Creation Club, I think is what that's called. Yeah. The survival mode from the Creation Club, rather than any mods or anything, Argonians do have 2 extra effects. One, they get cold 25% faster in cold environments, because, you know, lizards, I guess. And then, in addition, they can eat raw meat without risk of disease, which is pretty cool. I don't think that that's going to affect my placement at all, because I don't think everybody plays with that mode on, and even if they do, I don't think that either of those changes are notable enough to really matter that much. Especially depending on what playstyle you're going to. You may just not need to go north for a long time. The final thing of note here, before we move on, I will mention the skills that they have. They start with +10 to lockpicking, which is definitely mid, I would say, because lockpicking is, I mean, individual player skill can affect that more than any skill, let's be honest here. But in addition to that, they do get +5 to alteration, light armor, pickpocket, restoration, and sneak. Those are, except pickpocket, all really good. And if you're going for a thief build, you might even like the pickpocket. So while they are pretty good at going for stealth, which makes sense given their history, they're also not actually terrible at going for more of a magic playstyle, or even sort of an arcane trickster, like magic rogue sort of vibe. I think that Argonians are pretty consistently, across the board, great options to play. For almost any playstyle, even. Next up, we got the Khajiit, the Khajiit boys. The little kitties. So, starting off, let's talk about their traits. They have the Claws bonus. So this doubles the Argonians' claw damage from 6 to 12. And that's about it. With the Argonians don't even list having bonus claw damage as a trait that they possess because it is so unimportant overall. Let's be honest here. The Khajiit having that claw bonus as a thing that is integral to their overall kit is really bad. Gonna be brutally honest with you here, because it just doesn't come up very often, and unfortunately Skyrim has removed pretty much any way of playing around an unarmed style of combat. Hopefully they bring it back in the next Elder Scrolls game, because it's fun. Like, I don't know what to tell you. However, that is not the only thing Khajiits have. They also have Night Eye, which you can use a couple times per day, and it lasts for 60 seconds. It just gives you night vision. This one, okay, I'm going to give this one the same kind of kindness that I gave to the Argonian abilities. If you're playing modded, that shit slaps. I like to play with hardcore darkness mods all the time. I like dungeons to be dark. That's very useful in those sorts of scenarios. It's not enough to move the Khajiit any higher than they're going to be going, which is, well, we'll see in a moment. But it's at least useful sometimes. That's it. So that's all that the Khajiit have in the base game. Claws and good eyes. I don't think it will surprise anyone when I put them into subpar. Now, there are some things that keep them from being trash, because, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, none of the races are worthless, none of the races are so bad that they're unusable. Everything has something going for it. The benefit that they have from the survival mode, for instance, is actually pretty good. They have no weaknesses. Instead, they have Fortify Warmth, which actually increases their resistance to the cold by 15 points. Now, notably, this is not cold resistance. This is merely resistance to cold environments. So, it's not that helpful, but it is good. And they can also eat raw meat, same as an Argonian. However, without something as powerful as the Hiss skin, they just can't compete in overall effectiveness. They do have, I would argue, an overall better lineup of skills. First off, they get plus 10 in Sneak, which is more useful than Lockpicking for sure. And then they get plus 5 in Alchemy, Archery, Lockpicking, One-Handed, and Pickpocket. Now, they're not as flexible. They are probably the most thief-coded thieves that ever thieved a thief, right? They really want to do the Skyrim Stealth Archer, Sneak Attack, One-Handed Dagger Boy kind of thing, with a little bit of pickpocketing and alchemy mixed in for the pizzazz. But overall, they're not even inherently the best race at doing that, I would argue. And anybody is really good at that because that playstyle is so good and so consistent. So overall, I would definitely rate the flexibility of the Argonians significantly higher. And again, Hiss Skin is such a good ability that even though Argonians are overall kind of average to mid, bumps them up. Whereas Khajiit are they just don't have anything going for them, really, frankly. And it's sad. Like, don't get me wrong, you can do some funny things with the unarmed damage. You can stack it with, what's that one perk? BUESP saves me again. It tells me the perk right there in the notes section. Fists of Steel. You can get certain equipment or enchant things and whatever and boost your unarmed damage and run around punching people to death, and it's great. But it's just not great across the board. I think Khajiit were one of the races that were dropped the hardest in Skyrim. They really do not live up to their potential in any meaningful way, in my opinion. Which I do think is a huge bummer, of course. So the next race that we're going to talk about is kind of an interesting one, and that is Orcs, and we're going to put them in good for the moment. Orcs are interesting because they used to be considered to be possibly beast folk, but now, they're referred to as Orismer. They're elves, right? Maybe, possibly? It's unclear. So I'm putting them in the section between beast folk and elves because the only ones they don't really have any direct connection to seems to be humans. Whatever, right? Orcs are, I'm just going to put them where they belong right now, which is powerful. Orcs are probably the best overall race in the game in terms of just like ignoring their skills and playing as pretty much anything. The reason is that their activatable ability, Berserker Rage, is crazy strong. For 60 seconds, a whole minute, which is a pretty long time for this, you take half damage and do double damage. Bonkers stuff. The only thing that the damage doesn't affect, I believe, is spells. Maybe shouts also don't do more damage. I assume they probably don't. But it also will not protect you from magic. It only protects you from like physical things, but that just means that you spec pure into magic resistance and you never worry about taking damage again. This is one of those traits where, I've been talking about, like, if you're playing modded or like high difficulty and stuff, some of these guys' weaker traits get stronger. With the orc, their strongest trait gets stronger because the more damage everything else is doing, the more value you get out of taking half damage from it. It's great. Berserker Rage is awesome. It's the only thing they have going for them because they need nothing else, god damn it. The only other bonus they get is, of course, from the survival mode, which is Stalwart, which is a 15% resistance to hunger and fatigue, and increases your resistance to cold environments by 10. So even in this case, they happen to be just more resilient to everything, basically, in the survival mode, which is crazy. Like, they're just awesome, right? Their skills don't really matter that much compared to this, but they're actually a pretty decent layout. They start with plus 10 to heavy armor, which I actually don't love that for them. I do think that they should have plus 10 to smithing, personally. But they do get plus 5 to block, enchanting, one-handed, smithing, and two-handed. So they're pretty good at brawling, but in keeping with the lore of orcs, they're also pretty fantastic master craftsmen overall. I think that throughout the lore, the only people who could really compare to their sort of racial achievements, if you want to call them that, which, God, that sounds like that's going to get me put on a list, but the only thing that really it feels like would compare to them would be the Dwemer, but the Dwemer are just kind of on a whole nother level compared to everybody, but they ain't around no more, so who's really winning? Owned, idiot, I guess. Either way, getting a +5 to enchanting and smithing is quite nice if you're going for a crafting-focused build. The block bonus and the one-handed bonus leans into sword and board, and the two-handed bonus allows you to also play something more of a berserker playstyle. The heavy armor +10, it's okay. They're not super flexible, they don't have any stealth effects that they really like synergize with, and they're not particularly good at magic. However, everybody likes taking less damage, and squishy mages and squishy thieves might even like the option to take less damage enough that the berserker rage element gets more value. So overall, gotta say, orc 10 out of 10, top 2 classes in the game really overall. Now we can get into the elves. Now we're going to be starting off with the Dark Elf, the Dunmer, these bad boys. These guys are pretty good, I would say, honestly. Starting off, they resist fire by 50%. We'll talk about that more in a moment. They also have a daily ability, Ancestor's Wrath, that they can activate, which is basically a flame cloak spell. For 60 seconds, anybody who gets too close to you takes 8 points of fire damage per second. You can only activate it once per day. I don't know if I mentioned that. What is cool about this, as the UESP points out, this effect benefits from all destruction perks that would be applicable to a flame cloak spell. So if you are a mage, this effect gets stronger, which is pretty cool. Not a problem with that. They are overall pretty good, and they have one extra thing that I should note here before I move on, because I want to talk about the resist fire ability more in depth here in a sec. Everybody starts the game with these spells, you know, healing and flames, right? However, the Dunmer also start with sparks, which gives them a pretty cool early game option for dealing with mages, which isn't particularly helpful. It's nothing too crazy, but it is nice. I don't hate it. I'm going to move Dunmer up a tier to the Great category. Now, I do think they are sort of at the bottom of this category, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The reason why I wanted to go back to the Resist Fire ability is to point out that this synergizes incredibly well with vampires, which are, you know, weak to fire. Being able to resist that effect, I think that the vampire effect is like, it starts at 25, then it goes to 50, then it's 75% weakness to fire, depending on your tier of vampire, right? I think? I don't remember. Either way, this effect is very strong for vampire playstyles specifically, and if you are leaning into the magic elements of the Dunmer, because they are kind of battle mage focused. If you're leaning into the magic elements of the Dunmer, then this can be really helpful because the Necromage perk makes all restoration spells strong. Well, it actually makes all spells stronger on undead, right? So, yeah, you can do some pretty cool stuff with that combo with the Dunmer because they aren't as squishy as a vampire when it comes to flame magic. In addition, just getting to start with an extra spell is kind of cool. It gives you some extra options early on. Overall, though, they aren't anything crazy. They don't measure up to the Hiskin by any means. They are towards the bottom of Great. I could see an argument for good, but I think that the Vampire synergy is interesting enough to bump them up that one little tier. Now, for skills, they do have really good skills, I'd argue. They start with +10 in Destruction, which is fine overall. But more importantly, they get +5 to Alchemy, always nice. Alteration and Illusion, always fantastic, as well as Light Armor and Sneak. The Sneak is sort of random, I think. I personally would have given them one-handed there. It's weird how many races start with a sneak bonus. But I guess it is what it is on that front. The other skills all help them lean heavily into that battle mage playstyle, though, and even sneak can come in handy if you do want to go for more of a rogue vibe. They just overall are very flexible, and their bonuses are pretty cool. Ancestor's Wrath is not insanely good. Only 8 points per second of fire damage is whatever. However, it's free. You know, it's a once a day activatable, and it does benefit from destruction perks, and that is something that you're good at. So overall, pretty good. Dark Elf, I haven't played them as much as I probably should, given that they are a magic-focused people. Next up, we have the boys. High Elves, Altmer, my favorite race to play these days, despite the fact that the Thalmor make me want to wipe out my own people. They are, in my opinion, weirdos. Okay, now let's talk about why. Why do I consider these guys to be freaks other than that their skin is yellow? Alright, the color of urine. Starting off, they have the Highborn ability. This is 50 extra magicka, just forever. Now this is awesome, and this gets passed over a lot, because people are like, I'll get 50 in just a couple levels, anyway, it's fine. But that's several levels where you, as an Altmer, can invest in health instead of magicka, compared to, say, a Dunmer mage, right? Gotta say, love that instantly for them. It's consistent, it's nothing crazy, but it is consistent. The next effect, oh god, I forgot to mention something about the Dunmer. I just realized, oopsies. I'll talk about that in a second. We'll circle back to them. The other effect of the High Elves, of the Altmer, is their activatable daily power, which is Highborn. Both their abilities are called Highborn. They ran out of cool words, I guess, in the writer room that day. This regenerates your magicka faster for 60 seconds. It's an increase, according to the UESP, it's an increase of 2,500%. So it's real noticeable. That's woof. That's real good. Now that ability is good throughout the entire game. Now, does that compare to Hiskin or Berserk? Not really. But it's kind of difficult to compare one-to-one, right? Because mages can struggle a lot with mana regen, especially in the early to mid-game. But even late-game, it could be a bit of a pain in the ass. I would say that Altmer slip in right here, because I do think that if you are playing as a mage, Altmer are by far the best race. I would consider Altmer to be top 3 races, because they are the best mage race in the game. Alright? Now, if you compare them overall, if you want like a generically good character that's just going to fit into any playstyle, nah, they barely scrape into great because their activatable is so strong for a specific playstyle, and for one other secret reason I'll tell you in a minute. But in addition to that, like, they aren't very good at other stuff. If we talk about their skills for a second, they get plus 10 to Illusion. That's awesome, alright? Illusion is low-key the strongest magic school in the game that isn't like enchanting or alchemy. I know alchemy is technically a stealth skill, but let's be honest here. Let's be real with ourselves for a moment. It's a magic school. Their other skills are plus 5 alteration, conjuration, destruction, enchanting, and restoration. If mysticism still existed, it would be in here somewhere. They are good at all magic, they are good at enchanting, they don't get any bonuses to alchemy, which I think they used to. So that's kind of a bummer. But by and large, they're still quite good at all of the magic stuff. The fact that they're good at enchanting and they're good at illusion does mean you could go for sort of an arcane trickster style build without too much effort. But if we're looking purely at, you know, the flexibility, they ain't got it. Now the reason why I would put them in great, even though they are so hyper specialized, is because of their additional spell. Yes, much like the Dunmer, they do start with an extra spell, and that extra spell is Fury. Like Tyson Fury, but in spell form. Fury obviously makes people fight each other, and allows you to cause a lot of disruptions in the early game, especially before enemies start to outscale that spell and you have to get a better one. But it's so handy early on, it's so inconsistently or poorly used by a lot of people that I see do early mage gameplay on YouTube. It's just very, very solid, frankly. That being said, overall, they definitely, I think, go into the great category. They're sort of in a weird spot because they aren't as flexible as Dunmer, but they are stronger at one specific playstyle. Now, I will note here as well that the Dunmer and the High Elf both have, I believe, the exact same effect here from the survival mode specifically, which is the resist fatigue effect. Yes. What that does is it gives you a 25% resistance to fatigue. I don't think this is meaningful. In survival mode, I'm sure it's quite good, but I don't think it's meaningful enough to move either of them around at all, frankly speaking. I think it's just fine for what it is. The next Mer race, double checking here, yes, also has the resist fatigue ability, that being the Bosmer, or the Wood Elves. So all the elves resist fatigue. They don't gotta sleep as much. They ain't eepy boys. Bosmer are interesting for a handful of reasons, one of which being that female Bosmer are canonically taller than male Bosmer, which I think is fantastic. We stan a short king here. However, we don't really stan Bosmer, unfortunately. Let's start off with what they've got going for them here. Resist disease and poison. They resist 50% of all diseases, which is the same as Argonians, and that is nice, depending on the modded environment you're in. And they also resist poisons by 50%, which is better than what the Argonians have, right? However, that's about the only effect that Bosmer have going for them. Their only other bonus is Command Animal, which is a once a day, 60-second Command Animal effect. It just isn't very good. It will work on most animals, in Skyrim, but only lasting for 60 seconds? It's just not great. Just not good. It turns you into like a discount Spriggan, and that's not where you want to be in your life. Overall, I would say that Bosmer honestly got to slide down into the average tier. They're definitely kept out of subpar, in my opinion, because they get plus 10 to archery, plus 5 to alchemy, light armor, lockpicking, did I just say snock? Pickpocket and sneak. I'm good at words. I word for a living. Either way, moving on past that, the skill layout that they have obviously hyperfixates them into the stealth archer playstyle, but that is a really strong playstyle, so I can't really be too upset about it. Pickpocket is wasted, and lockpicking is unnecessary, though, so even then, they're just not insanely good. If I had to choose between Khajiit and Wood Elves, it is kind of a close matchup, to be honest with you, but I will say I would pick Bosmer most of the time. If you remember to use Command Animal, you can get good value out of it. Like, it doesn't take much effort to get decent value out of that effect. And starting with 10 in archery is pretty nice. In addition to that, resisting poisons is handy at times. Not gonna lie to you. Is it consistently good? Well, no. Well, no, it's not. But it's occasionally good, and sometimes that's good enough, alright? But no more dunking on them. Moving past that into the human section. So we're going to be starting off with Bretons. Now, Bretons used to be my favorite race to play in the video game. Until I eventually realized that in my heart of hearts, I've always been a bit of an elf. A tall, thin bastard. But I still love Bretons, and I do think that Bretons are legitimately in the top billing for this game. I think this might actually be kind of a controversial take. I feel like people don't really talk about this enough. However, Bretons get a 25% resistance to magic all the time, which is really good. It's very solid, and is easy to stack up with other effects such as the Atronach Birth Sign and a few other things, and get as close to 100% resistance to magic as you can get, really. Either way, Bretons starting off strong, 25% resistant to an entire damage type. Very nice to have. Mages can be really annoying when fighting the player character. In addition, they have the Greater Power Dragon Skin, which absorbs 50% of the magicka from hostile spells for 1 minute, once per day. Obviously, also very strong. This activatable is not nearly as powerful as Berserk or Hiss Skin. I would even rate it lower than Highborn. However, when combined with their innate 25% resistance to magic, Bretons make insanely good tanks, right? You just get your armor stat up so that you resist physical damage, and then you just exist as an anti-magic tank as well. But in addition to all of that, right, all of those neat bonuses, they also get Conjure Familiar, which is a spell that falls off crazy hard, right? But then again, all of the starting spells do, and at least it's not like that's their daily power, like some people. Conjure Familiar is really handy early on, especially on higher difficulties and in modded scenarios, because it's just a body that will draw aggro for a second. Some people will criticize it and be like, well, you know, enemies will only hit it like once, it's very weak, it doesn't do much damage, etc. It's like, yeah, and that's one hit that isn't on you. And if you're not playing as a mage, that's one hit that isn't on you using a resource you don't care about. And if you are playing as a mage, shit levels up your Conjuration. That's really handy. Conjuration is very powerful. Speaking of, skill-wise, the Bretons start with plus 10 Conjuration, which is pretty good, I would say. It's not anything insane. I do prefer Illusion and Destruction, but it is nice. It is kind of a good second place to those two. And in addition to that, they do get plus 5 to Alchemy, Alteration, Illusion, Restoration, and Speech. Speech is wasted, to be honest with you. You don't really care about the Speech stat at all in Skyrim, and plus 5 to it certainly doesn't help. It doesn't do anything, really. But the Alchemy, Alteration, Illusion, and Restoration bonuses are all beloved. Those are all fantastic. Yes, as noted here, because I did want to double check on this, you are able to get 100% spell absorption as a Breton by having the Atronach Stone and then activating your racial power. You can also get 85% magic resistance by getting, let's see here, the Agent of Mara, the Alteration Perk Magic Resistance, and the Lord Stone, which puts you at the game cap of 85%. It's possible to get it in some other ways as well, but it is what it is. Overall, this is just very strong, right? Even if you don't get that high of resistance, it's still pretty bonkers to get anywhere near that. Even like 50, 60, 70% magic resistance is wild, because you just walk around like that, right? Other races would be 25% lower than you. You know, if you're at 50, they're only at 25 magic resistance, which is still good, but not quite as good as a Breton, just saying. I think that if you're going to be playing kind of a generic character and you don't want to make a huge decision on your playstyle until you're in the game, the safest options are these two, because one is super tanky, and one is super tanky more under certain circumstances. And then Argonians have Hiss Skin to kind of do a similar thing. Next up, we got the Imperials, which, this is a terrible image of an Imperial. Can I just say that? Like, this guy looks like he's gonna stab me for cocaine money. Imperials are, unfortunately, subpar. They are arguably the worst race in the game. Arguably. It's a real fight to the bottom with them and Khajiit. I would love to put Imperials as the kind of like, oh, they go here and they're just sort of like okay at whatever, but even their decent skills can't really save them. I will say I put them above Khajiit a little bit, but it's close. So what do? They have Imperial Luck. They find more gold. Yeah, that's it. For the details on this, the UESP kindly provides us with some numbers. They have 100% chance of finding 2 to 10 extra gold in all chests that normally contain gold. As well as corpses of enemies that will drop golds, like bandits, dragons, draugr, falmer, forsworn, giants, and reiklings. That's it. Gold is not hard to get in Skyrim. You may not be aware of this, but pretty easy to break the economy in that game. So this ability, it's cool thematically, but the fact that it's one of only 2 bonuses that they get is just not great. The other effect is their greater power, which calms nearby people for 60 seconds once per day. It's okay. I will say it's better than the calm animal in a lot of ways, because it will affect, because I don't think it affects animals, but it will affect like most humanoid NPC things, which is like, you know, aforementioned bandits, just as an example. I don't know if it would work on draugr, actually. Huh. The downside of this is that unlike the Dunmer Ancestor Fire move thing, the Imperial version of this doesn't, well, not version of it, but their activatable power does not benefit at all from illusion perks, meaning that it never gets better, right? It is forever locked to how it starts the game. The only thing that keeps them slightly higher than Khajiit is that I do think that their their skill array is very, very slightly better. They get plus 10 to Restoration, which is nice because Restoration can be a pain to focus on at times, and a bit of a pain to raise. They get plus 5 to Block, Destruction, Enchanting, Heavy Armor, and One-Handed, which is a decent array. They're pretty good at magic stuff, and they're pretty good at warrior stuff, so they're a decent Paladin-style character, which gives them a bit more flexibility than Khajiit, but they don't really have any bonuses towards Stealth, which is fine. But when you combine that loss with mediocre traits and the fact that they are the only race in the game that starts with plus 10 in a magic school but does not get an extra spell from that school, not great. Just doesn't look good for Imperials. They haven't been good in a long time. I'd like to see them come back someday, please, Bethesda. Next up, we have Nords. These are, of course, the golden boys of Skyrim. They are the dudes. This is their homeland. How good are they, you may be wondering? Well, the answer is they won't be moving out of the good tier. They start with 50% resistance to frost, which is pretty solid. Don't get me wrong. They used to be resistant to lightning as well. There's my Moro Boomer comment for the day. 50% resistance to frost is pretty nice. Frost mages are relatively threatening and reasonably, I almost said constant, but common. I wouldn't quite say they're constant. A lot of draugrs use frost magic, though. I think Restless and up, some of them do. So it's pretty handy in most circumstances. Their activatable power is worthless. Battle Cry, 30 seconds, enemies run away from you. Activated once per day kind of stuff. It is bad. It's not good. First off, it will hit civilians, which is unfortunate. Second, it doesn't benefit from any illusion perks, same as the Imperial Calm version of this. And in addition, you never, ever, 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 ever want to actually use Fear in situations where you are like a melee character. Unless you're building entirely around it because you're a sicko. But Fear effects cause enemies to run away, which means they're not in smacking range anymore, is what I'm getting at here. So, not great. Possibly on very high difficulties in modded settings, you might get some value out of this, because perhaps you are in over your head, you activate this, everyone runs away for a second, giving you a chance to then run away. But it's still pretty mid. Finally, they also have their survival mode bonus. I will mention here, I did not say anything about the Breton or Imperial Creation Club survival mode bonuses because they don't have any. They're treated as like default boyos, right? Same with Red Guards, who we'll talk about in a moment. But Nords do in fact resist cold environments by 25 points, which I think is higher than what Khajiit had. Maybe it was the same. Either way, again, I don't think that matters a whole lot. 50% resistance to frost and a decent array of skills I think keeps them in the good category. So let's talk about their skills real fast. Plus 10 to two-handed is pretty nice to have if you're going for that playstyle. I wouldn't consider it a great playstyle overall, personally, but if it is your thing, good on you. But in addition to that, they also have plus 5 to block and one-handed, as well as light armor, which is good. I prefer light armor over heavy armor personally, and I would rate it higher overall on the list. So skill-wise, they're pretty decent. I mean, like that by itself is pretty good, but they also have plus 5 to smithing and speech. And this is kind of what I mean. I don't think Nords should have the same smithing level as orcs. That's like orcs' whole thing. But speech is a dump stat, obviously, doesn't matter, doesn't affect your voice, it does not affect the thum, so who cares. But smithing is nice, one-handed, light armor, block, two-handed, they're good as warriors. 50% frost resistance is a hefty amount to resist. It's not quite as good as Dunmer, I don't think, and Battle Cry is much harder to get value out of. But I overall would rate them higher than any of these three. I could see an argument for putting them in average, but I don't think so. I think they are good, albeit somewhat barely. Next up, we have the Red Guards. Put them in good for now. We'll see if they stay there. Spoiler alert, no. Red Guards have two abilities. They also do not get any kind of survival mode resistances. I assume that if there had been any areas in Skyrim that were hot, they would have gotten a resistance to overheating because they are, of course, a desert people. That does not exist in Skyrim. I will say, I'm going to throw this out here for free, that I think that the Creation Club survival mode should have made them have a resistance to fatigue or something like that. They are notably considered hardy. That is one of their defining traits as a people. So I think it's kind of criminal that they don't end up with anything similar to that. But that being said, let's talk about what they have. They resist poison by 50%. Whee! Resisting poison is cool, don't get me wrong, but 50% only is just not anything too special. It's what the Bosmer have, and they're down here. In addition, they have Adrenaline Rush. Now, I want to make my other Moro Boomer statement here briefly. Adrenaline Rush used to be busted. Back in Morrowind, when stamina was called fatigue, and when fatigue helped with everything that you do. Red Guards being able to regenerate that faster was really useful. Now, Adrenaline Rush, despite regenerating your stamina 10 times faster for 60 seconds, is just not that good. Like, it just doesn't matter. They're down here. I will say, I prefer Adrenaline Rush over Command Animal. And I mean, you get the best effect that the Bosmer have here, which is resisting poison, on the Red Guard as well. They are literally just a better version of the Wood Elf. Even in terms of their skills, I would argue. They start with plus 10 to one-handed, which is a fantastic option for them, because one-handed is just great in this game, in my opinion. But in addition to that, they also have plus 5 to alteration, archery, block, destruction, and smithing. The bonuses to magic are sort of weird, because Red Guards have never really had that in their lore or anything, but I think it's a cool way to push the race. I think my only complaint is that Imperials feel kind of left behind, because I feel like Imperials are the ones who should be the generalist battle mage humans, because they are generalists, right? They should be a little bit good at everything. But I'm not going to begrudge the fact that Red Guards have, frankly, a pretty fantastic spread of skills. One-handed is good. Alteration and destruction are both good in their own ways, especially alteration. Archery and block are cool, and smithing is great, right? Like, Obviously, archery is an incredible way to play the game. If you're playing as a battle mage type, you can open with archery from stealth, one tap some poor fucker on the other side of the map, switch to using alteration to buff yourself as you charge into battle, and then one-handed and block to kill people with weapons that you made using smithing. It's great. They are, however, only ever average because their abilities are just not as good as any of these ones up here. Like, I'd rather play a Nord for most characters because unfortunately Nords have 50% resistance to frost, and I just feel like that would be more useful overall. However, I do think that, as I said at the beginning, any of these races can be good, any of them are playable and usable. I am a fan, personally, of mostly these three, but I have a soft spot in my heart for Imperials as well, personally. That being said, let me know what races you guys love to play down in the comments, and scream at me angrily about the stuff that you think that I got wrong, because always open to dissenting opinions here. Unless you're mean to me, in which case, please don't be. I will cry. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. If you enjoy these tier lists, as I say, don't forget to comment, subscribe. Love to hear from you guys. Love to know if you're enjoying this stuff. And I will produce more in the future. If you guys have any requests for tier lists as well, let me know. Until next time, peace.